Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the MedTech Impact Podcast, where you get to hear from leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of medical technology. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn.
And we're your hosts of the show.
So today on the MedTech Impact Podcast, we're delighted to be joined by Dave Hughes, CEO and founder of Novosound. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me along.
Hey Dave, well it's super cool because a little bit biased, but our first Scottish guest, so apologies if you're listening in. We don't have subtitles available for the podcast, but we hope you can understand, we hope you can follow along, and I'm sure as always you will be informed and inspired by this discussion. So to kick things off, Dave, we always like to set the stage for the audience and talk about a big problem that's being solved. And I know that you obviously have a platform technology, but where for Novosound are you really focusing on at the moment in terms of the medical application?
Okay, so at Novosound, we are a sensors developer, an ultrasound sensors developer, and our vision is ultrasound integrated everywhere. We make ultrasound sensors out of our facility in Scotland across lots of different markets, industrial, medical, and consumer. But the real medical problem that we're trying to tackle at the moment is that of blood pressure, monitoring blood pressure 24/7 without a cuff in a way that enables it to be almost as simple as putting on your smartwatch.
And for those listening in, when you're referencing cuff, that's just the idea that somebody can go to their doctor or their nurse and get that measurement inside the hospital setting or the care setting.
I think when we talk about the cuff, it's the standard blood pressure monitor device that you may get when you go to your doctor and they put the thing on your upper arm and it inflates, causes a wee bit of pain. You definitely notice it happening. But then these can also be the consumer devices that you may have in your bathroom cabinet that allow you to put them around your wrist or up on your upper arm. And they basically inflate and then they basically restrict the blood flow and then deflate, and from that they get the blood pressure measurement. So we really want to move away from those type of devices and become kind of truly a device or a way of monitoring blood pressure that just doesn't kind of make itself known that that's what it's doing.
And you're thinking about blood pressure. Is there a particular disease or underlying issue that when you're thinking of how this could be applied as being beneficial or problematic?
Well, as a founder, CEO of a growing startup, blood pressure is always on the front of my mind with stress, and kind of hypertension is probably the biggest one. I think 1.3 billion adults around the world have problems with hypertension. This typically goes, I think about 50% of that goes unmanaged or unmonitored. Most people maybe get their blood pressure measured maybe once a year when they go to the doctors for a health check, and then if they have challenges or hypertension, it may go to in the morning, and in the evening they'll start to use the cuff devices in their home to get more data points. But we're really missing the point, or missing the data points in between the morning and the evening to actually see how blood pressure might ebb and flow through the days. So we really believe that if you can turn on that data source of minute by minute or even just hour by hour blood pressure, you can then start to improve the monitoring of blood pressure and therefore the management of hypertension and other kind of related diseases that cause high blood pressure, such as stress, and then obviously it's an indication down the line of potential for stroke as well.
So Kyle, like hearing the big numbers as we often hear on the show from our guests, but I think when I was looking at some of the American stats, it's like half adult Americans suffer from hypertension. And to Dave's point, if you're lucky to have an annual checkup, maybe you get some information thrown at you during that. It's high, it's low. You probably actually don't know what it means. And so I think there's a couple of points here about, do you actually have the information in the first place? And once you get it, what does it actually mean for you? And so, I think it's so exciting because this technology, which we can hopefully come on to next, is like opening doors to make it understandable, but clearly accessible as well.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, to your point, Richard, this is so relatable, I think, to everyone out there listening. We all, might have, experienced some high blood pressure in our lives, or definitely know someone maybe who does, right? And what's really exciting too, I think, just even over the past year, working in the medical device industry, seeing companies like Medtronic and Record Medical, these companies that are bringing these devices to market to help minimally invasive catheters to treat hypertension. But here you are, Dave, and you're trying to ultimately innovate around the monitoring side of this, right? And so before we really get into the sensors with Novosound, I do want to just kind of ask you a little bit more about these cuffs. What is it? I mean, I don't find them that painful. Like, I don't care. There's a little pressure on your arm, whoop-de-doo, and it gives me my reading and I'm off and I'm running. So really, what is then, like, what's the problem then with that technology today? Like, why are you trying to innovate around it?
So I think Richard raised a good point about, say you just take the cuff at face value and you get your value of 120 over 80 milligrams of mercury, or maybe you get told, like me, it's 143 over 105 milligrams mercury at that moment in time, which might be in a doctor's office, or it might be when you're just playing about with the cuff because you found one. What do you do with that single data point? And the question is, how useful is that? Because some people may just have high blood pressure. They might just, or conversely, some people might just have low blood pressure if they're particularly healthy, or they've just got, their hydrodynamics of their own body are high blood pressure states, low blood pressure states. We really believe that the dynamics of blood pressure is the untapped data source. So if somebody has high blood pressure, do the problems happen by just being continually high blood pressure and stress it puts on the arteries, or is it the deltas when that falls? Is there a range in which, if you are 140 over 100, does it actually matter if that stays 140 over 100 for a week, 6 weeks or so, or is it the rapid fluctuations that actually cause the underlying health conditions to be exacerbated? Conversely, if you are in a low blood pressure state, obviously prone to fainting or other challenges there, doesn't matter if it rockets suddenly and it puts the body under an unknown stress that maybe we don't know the mechanics of, but that conversely, how low can it go before it causes an ongoing challenge? So going to the idea of, at the moment with these cuff devices, as you said, for most people, putting it on, it inflates, it feels a bit weird, you get a tingly sensation in your hands as the blood starts flowing down again. That's a transient, people get over it, that's fine. Sure. But then all you're left with is that single point that in itself doesn't have the dynamics. But then white coat syndrome's a huge problem there as well, where the doctor comes in, they put it on, they might take 2 or 3 readings because they are inherently have an accuracy of maybe plus or minus 5 to plus or minus 20 milligrams of mercury if they're placed wrongly. That even if you do have that single value, what is the uncertainty in it, and do you have to do it again and an hour later, 3 hours later, after eating, before eating? We just don't know the dynamics of blood pressure at the moment, which is why if you can move away from one of these cuff devices with the moving parts and inflation that happens on the device to a completely still, almost like an optical sensor, or like a smartwatch device that measures your blood oxygen, you don't notice it happening. Therefore, it can just do it throughout the day, getting you these trends up and down, and then start to work out not just the absolute value, but let's look at the dynamics, and there's something changing the dynamics.
Yeah, continuous. That's the key there, Yep. So they're going to be able to help people really see, over time how their blood pressure is increasing and decreasing. And hey, I would imagine that, geez, if I'm seeing my blood pressure, continuously high, that's putting a lot of stress on my arteries over a period of time. I want to probably find a way to treat this sooner than later. Yep. Rather than just showing up one morning after not getting any sleep because I was up all night with my sick children and I'm under all this stress, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, here I go. I'm in the doctor's. What kind of bad news am I going to get today? And they throw that cuff on and my blood pressure's through the roof, where that might not always be the case. So you don't know how bad it might truly be. I love it, Dave. So tell us, what then is Novosound doing? How are you approaching this opportunity to provide continuous monitoring through ultrasound with your technology and capabilities?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is all about the continuous monitoring. I think you made a good point there where you said if you're up all night looking after your kids, very difficult to use one of these inflating cuff devices when you're asleep. So there's a whole untapped understanding of what your blood pressure is actually doing when you're asleep. And in hospital environments, care homes, a lot of these patients are under sedation or they are asleep, so you putting a cuff on them and then inflating them wakes them up, which probably stresses them out a little bit, maybe change effects. So I'm a physicist by training. Heisenberg uncertainty principles always don't let the measurement affect the observation, or vice versa. We really believe in Novosound that the cuff device is the epitome a measurement device affecting what it's trying to measure. So at Novosound, what we're doing is we're trying to get, well, this isn't, it may sound like I'm doing an expletive at the moment, but what we're saying is we're fuck-offing to the cuff, or telling the cuff to fuck off. And ultimately, we just want to try and move away from any moving parts or any kind of any mechanical parts that could affect the reading itself. So with Novosound, we're an ultrasound sensors business. Ultrasound is a very well-known technique for looking inside the body. Probably every single person on the planet, maybe 99.999% of people on the planet have at some point been exposed to ultrasound rays, either before they were born or as they've gone through the life getting ultrasound scans. It's a non-invasive, safe way of looking inside the body. So what we do with ultrasound is that we put it on the radial artery using a very, very small postage stamp sized ultrasound probe that can do high resolution imaging, so we can actually image the arterial wall, the walls of the radial artery inside the wrist, and using the idea of when the blood pumps, you can feel your pulse because there's a movement in this artery wall, a distension. So if we think about the heartbeat that goes da-dum, when it's that first duh, that's when the artery expands because the blood shunted the fluid down the pipe, and then it closes. The heart valve closes in between the two beats, or in between the two sounds. You get a small rest, and then it sinks as the heart relaxes, and then it does it again, and it does this 60 times a minute, all the way to 100 times a minute. The blood is constantly doing this kind of do, and your artery is moving as this happens. We use ultrasound at a very fast frame rate to get that very fine movement out of the radial artery. We then put it through our machine learning and a physics-based model to convert that to a milligram of mercury. The benefit here is that there's been no moving parts from a human perception point of view. Yes, there is an ultrasound signal going through your arm or through your wrist. You don't feel it, much like you don't feel an ultrasound scan. You don't have an inflating cuff. And compared to the other form of continuous monitoring of blood pressure, which is a line, an artery line that you actually put a catheter through the inside the artery, completely non-invasive as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's interesting too is that the whole ultrasound industry today. I mean, when I think of ultrasound, I think of probes. I think the probes. For example, maybe like when my wife, was pregnant, and they go and they do an ultrasound scan of, the stomach there, and then just being able to see, what's going on with the baby, right? But I think about those probes, and I think that they're pretty complex. They're very expensive. They're a lot larger than something that I would imagine being on a watch. So can you kind of talk a little bit more about your ultrasound technology and I guess at a higher level, the approach here on how you're able to make it smaller, I guess, than other ultrasound technologies? And, you mentioned, using it on a watch and leveraging light. I'm fascinated, and I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
So when I founded Novosound back in 2018, this was as a university spin-out. So in Scotland, there's 11 universities. Out of that, about 7 to 8 of them do ultrasound research, and this is not to toot the horn of Scotland, and is the diagnostic ultrasound back in 1954 came out of Scotland. It was Glasgow University. It made the transition from it being an industrial inspection tool to monitoring inside. I think the first Lancet paper was called pulsed inspection of abdominal masses, and abdominal masses is a really nice way of talking about a baby in the mother's belly, but here we are. But that's 1954 in Scotland. So out of the 11 universities building on that legacy, still about 7 to 8 of them have ultrasound research at PhD, master's level, and I was one of them. I did my PhD in biomedical ultrasound, making very small high resolution ultrasound sensors in the University of Strathclyde for inside the mouth for a dental challenge. I then got my PhD and started doing a lot more ultrasound research and became a senior research fellow at the University of the West of Scotland. And I was still making ultrasound probes using the traditional methods, the ones that you're talking about for making the baby probes, for example. And the challenge there is, yes, they're bulky, they're quite big, they're handheld probes. They tend to have quite low resolution. Ultrasound as an imaging modality isn't as cool as MRI or high resolution as SPECT or PET. So they're all very low resolution, because when you try to make them high resolution, it becomes very difficult to machine or manufacture them, which pushes the cost right up. So it just doesn't lend itself to low-cost, high-resolution imaging. My PhD was all about trying to get to that sweet spot. But anyway, you roll forward to when I was at the University of the West of Scotland. They have what's known as a thin film research institute. Thin films, another technology I'm going to bring in now. So you've got your ultrasound one, difficult at high resolution to manufacture at scale at the right cost point. Thin films, on the other hand, are kind of additive manufacturing of materials that have different properties. You get thin films that are optical thin films, like the anti-reflection coating on your glasses. That's a thin film. You get friction coatings, in terms of if you're putting a metal hip replacement inside another metal thing, just so that they don't kind of, as the hip moves about, you might put a chromium thin film coating to reduce friction. What we were looking at was piezoelectric thin films. So these are thin films that generate sound or generate ultrasound. And from that, we worked out you could actually make very high resolution ultrasound probes very, very easily, and a large number of them. So we patented the hell out of this way of making ultrasound probes using thin films, and then went back to all the challenges we were trying to do with high resolution imaging inside the mouth, and we built a company around it. And we do work in the dental imaging space. But really, we could have just, a startup only needs to solve one problem as a startup. We had so many opportunities. We've almost got too much opportunity in where this technology could go, that we start to look at the real ones that we can do with the thin film technology that the incumbent traditional ultrasound manufacturers, the Philips, the Siemens, all Mindrays, for example, cannot do. And that kind of landed us in, well, ultrasound's always been in the hospital. Why is that? And it's because making at the consumer level scale has been difficult. With our thin film technology, we can do that. We solve that problem because we can make a large number of very, very small ultrasound modules at the level of cost needed to get them into consumer devices. Somewhere along the route to that, we do a lot of medical to make sure it's got credibility in the medical space. But the Novosound core platform technology now, because we're not just a probe seller, we're not just a blood pressure monitor seller, we're kind of the Intel Inside AWS of the next generation of ultrasound devices, can attack lots of different markets. The blood pressure one is one we're developing in-house further down the road. But along the way, this technology allows it to be used at very low cost, high resolution applications such as intravascular, dental. We're doing other medical projects as well. So I would say that's in a nutshell, but went on quite a bit.
Well, you know what? You did a great job, David. I think really helping us understand, at least at a higher level here, the differences between, the older ultrasound technology and how you're leveraging this thin film, these flexible thin film materials to, perform ultrasound at a lower cost. And I think it's really important because, outside of also, monitoring hypertension, some of the things that you've mentioned, like the catheter space, we know that a lot of those intravascular ultrasound catheters, a lot of catheters used in these like energy-based diagnostic procedures, providing therapeutic outcomes, they're incredibly complex, sophisticated, very expensive. I mean, these catheters are probably $50,000 roughly, to the hospital per case, right? So if you think about what's driving that cost, especially in intravascular ultrasound, I wouldn't be one bit surprised if you were able to make a massive impact. But Richard, I want to bring this back to you because I think Dave did, again, a great job at kind of providing that overview. And what I'm curious about, Richard, and I'm sure you are too here, is kind of now how Dave is going to leverage this technology, in hypertension and really bring this to market.
Well, I wanted to take my hat off to you, Dave, because you brilliantly described so much there. I mean, like you articulated the history and like the whole development and evolution of this technology, and you can ring that Scottish bell all day. We're 100% behind that, so no harm there done, I'm sure. But yeah, let's, as Kyle said, bring it on to that go-to-market part, because clearly there's so many things you can do, and I love this aspect again around the accessibility and the affordability of what you can do with this technology. So again, when it comes to this go-to-market, how are you taking it? How are you partnering? What's that model?
Okay, so when I started Novosound, we were very much a product company. We would make ultrasound probes, and we tried to sell a large number of them to build a profitable business. And when you're trying to scale that up, it becomes quite exhausting. your own sales channels, you need your own marketing, and then that's you got one product in one market. For the amount of markets we have, we had to change, and the best source of change sometimes necessity. So when we started the business in 2018, the world was a completely different place to where it is in 2024. We were selling into the industrial oil and gas market, and we were also selling into the aviation market. And we completed our Series A funding round in December of 2019 for a huge scale-up year all the way through 2020. And by March 2020, we had torn up our business plan. We were just like, what the hell is going on around? Literally the world shut down. People stopped flying planes, so that put pay to the aviation market we were attacking. And the oil barrel price went negative, so there's no money to spend on oil and gas innovation. So we were thinking, great, we're now very cash rich because we closed our VC round, but we've got no customers, and we've got a large problem on our hand. And there was a view that we could just kind of shut it down, get it right down, let this blow over in 6 months, and then come back to it. But I could tell you exactly where the business would be had we done that. What we did notice, and my background is biomedical ultrasound, a PhD in high resolution ultrasound. It was my business partner that was more industrial, saying let's start there and go medical later in Novosound's life. With the pandemic hitting, we got a lot more inquiries about could we use these industrial products we had in the medical market. And the answer for us was always yes, and we've got some time on our hands now to develop it, so let's start developing some use cases. We'd already been working on a bladder monitor, so we started using that on the lung because it's very similar anatomically. And then we thought, well, let's try and see, is there a use for that? But every time we came up with a use case, other people would say, no, we want to use it for this, we want to use it for that. And we could have spun out the tech and created lots of different startups to do lots of different devices. But we looked more, what are people actually asking of Novosound? And we realised that we were a B2B business, we weren't a B2C. So we weren't trying to sell products anymore, we were trying to sell our IP, the thin film ultrasound, which is used for so many things that we don't really need to go out and find our own product market fit now, because customers are coming to us saying, we want to do it for intravascular, that's PavMed then from New York, or we want to use it. There's an industrial company that came with an idea and said, we want to use it for that. And rather than declining these, we started saying, yes, let's develop together, let's do co-development, a lot of engineering for a couple of years, get it to a product that then they can take to market. Novosound is then a hidden brand, Intel inside, of these products that the other companies take to market. So with the intravascular device, it'll be a PavMed logo on the device, but it's powered by Novosound. We've probably got about 7, maybe 8 products or projects running at the moment with key accounts that operate in this business model of kind of OEM, B2B, but each of them are huge scale opportunities that we can be very picky on our clients now. If we think about the blood pressure, we are developing the sensor stack. We call it a sound wave to screen approach, where the sound waves, what's going into the wrist, what you see on the screen as we get it to blood pressure, just the systolic, diastole, so the big number and the small number. And now we're looking for partners to actually want to develop that from the postage stamp size sensor we have and put it into the real estate on the wrist of a smartwatch or on a fitness band or on a remote patient monitor or a ICU monitor. So our business model lends us to basically having this nice stack of IP that achieves it solves a problem, in this case continuous blood pressure monitoring, and finding partners that want to develop it into a form factor that they can take to market.
Kyle, I find this absolutely fascinating, and thank you again, Dave, for just explaining that so well, because I think it's so interesting how you've managed to pivot. And of course, we hear this time and again from entrepreneurs, and the ability, it's the magic all startups as they have this sort of agile model where you haven't necessarily gone down that rabbit hole in terms of investing a lot of time and effort into a particular direction, and you have been, by the sounds of it, pardon the pun with your name, but Novosound has clearly been able to sort of play off that and now find a number of market opportunities. So for people listening in, I guess the thing I'm kind of interested to know is how are you connecting with these people? What's that kind of model, inbound, outbound? Where are you finding these opportunities?
I get asked this a lot, and I've started to reflect on, let's say, the 8 key accounts we have, which are big logos, big names that people know of that we are working with. And it has to be said that none of them, 0 out of the key accounts that we're working with, are ones that we've gone and knocked on their door. They've came to us. And partly that's because when things went digital or went remote during the pandemic, we were already set up as a remote business. I, as founder, as soon as the business started, had to work remotely, traveling the world, trying to get the noise out about Novosound. So our business was already functioning operationally as a remote hardware business. And then when the pandemic hit, we were ahead of the curve in how to digitally market. And we've always had a really strong marketing arm at Novosound. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to go to 11. We thought we had to really kind of ramp that up to hilt. And then we started to notice that our inbox every couple of weeks would link up with a lead coming in from, we're like, why is that company, a Silicon Valley tech giant that we use every single day, why are they coming to Novosound? Why is smartwatch company from Asia coming to Novosound? And we started just really drum up the idea that we aren't chasing leads and more people are actually now coming to us because there's the credibility from the academic side because of being a spin out. There's papers out there. We go to conferences. We publish work there. That gets us seen to be at the cutting edge of wearable ultrasound. And we're in a bit of a boom period there with all the different advances coming. But we're not, even though we're publishing in academic conferences, we're absolutely in the real world. No disrespect to academics, but we operate in the real commercial world, not the academic world. And one of the Silicon Valley tech companies that I think we use maybe 100 times a day or so, said to us that they'd seen the papers by our closest competitors, who are one on the East Coast in America, one on the West Coast in America, and they approached them first saying, we love that paper you published about, I don't know, it was wearable ultrasound. They said, we really love that. And can we get 10 units? And the university goes, yep, if you want to collaborate on a grant, we'll get a research associate, we'll get a grad student, and they can build 10 for you. And they're like, no, that's not what we're asking. They then come to Novosound, who has a wearable ultrasound platform, and say, can we get 10 of them? We say, well, when do you want it? Because we're already manufacturing. We're a manufacturing business. And that's operating in the real world, not the academic world. A lot of it's underpinned by academic research, but absolutely our strength is that kind of academic credibility, but good to go now with collaborative research projects on commercial terms.
That's so great to hear, Kyle. I know you're going to be jazzed about hearing their approach to marketing.
Well, of course, but it's awesome, right? Because here's what I love. Again, after working a decade in this whole contract manufacturing industry and trying to work with OEMs, as a salesperson, as a marketer, when I'm speaking with these OEMs, and especially earlier on when, you're out here trying to pitch to them, and you're wondering, like, why isn't this hitting the mark? What is it that they're not hearing that they want to hear? And what I learned over time is that, well, it's so incredibly important that you have some form of IP, or you have something that can give them a competitive edge in the field over their competitors and provide better outcomes to the industry, to patients. And, lower cost, great quality, and all that. Yeah, it's good, it's important, but it's not the innovation that they're really looking for that's going to make them stop and go, okay, yeah, you know what? I'll give you some time to talk. Let's hear it, right? And what I love about what you did, Dave, is that, again, I'm just reiterating what you said here, but ultimately, I thought it was a brilliant decision that you made to not say, hey, we're going to try and develop this one product and bring it to market and build a manufacturing facility and build up inventory and build a sales team and go sell it, because of the opportunity where your innovation, your technology can actually be integrated into several different companies, right? And I think your decision to be a B2B company based on that, was probably the best decision that you could have ever made for Novosound, because to your point, people are now hearing about this opportunity where, whoa, we can make this better, faster, stronger, not to sound cliche, but that's the truth, right? And if we can integrate Novosound's ultrasound technology into our products, well, then we can reach that next level of innovation and provide that next level of care, and outcomes to patients, to the industry. So, really brilliant stuff. I mean, I just wanted to ultimately provide those comments and remarks.
No, I think if we hadn't of switched from our existing business model to the B2B model, I doubt we would be having this conversation now. I would be probably back in the university, making probes and, thinking about what could have been. But that was really the the thing that allowed us to get through the pandemic and then come out of it much stronger. With some of the clients we're working with today came in the kind of mid 2020s, early 21 is when we started working with these, and they're still with us today, and they're getting so close to market. It also gives us a expedited route to get through the regulatory hurdles as well, because operating in industrial, there's a whole bunch of regulatory that needs there. There's medical, there's regulatory there, and then consumer, you've got other regulatory. But if we had to do that as three separate entities on our own back, the costs become astronomical and time to market goes even further. What we end up doing is partnering with people with proven track records to get through the regulatory, allowing us to, from a tech point of view, be their ultrasound tech team to accelerate them to market, so they don't need to, much like we don't need to learn how to get through regulatory, they don't need to learn how to do ultrasound. So by taking these together, we very much, when we're pitching to these, the lead comes in from a big company that's 1,000 if not 1,000,000 times bigger than us, we can then come in and say, look, the main thing that we're selling, yes, it's ultrasound, yes, it will solve a problem you have, but we are selling you an accelerated route to a new product being on the market.
Amazing. Now, let's talk a little bit about CES coming up, because I want to learn more about, what you're doing at CES and really how you're positioning Novosound, around this hypertension market. What are you going to be showcasing and displaying there? What are the people going to be able to see?
Yeah, so CES, this will be our third time at CES in Vegas in January. And I remember the first time we went, this was kind of early days of, well, in fact, we were already the B2B business, and I went to the board saying, right, there's this trade show in Vegas. I've been watching it ever since I was a kid, seeing all the cool gadgets coming out, consumer electronics show. I think Novosound needs to be there. And the board at the start was like, why CES? Do you just want a holiday in Vegas? Or, what are you just wanting to go to CES to see everything? Why is Novosound a B2B business going to the consumer electronics show? What's the point? And I said, yeah, I get that, but the consumer electronics that are getting sold to the consumer have to come from somewhere. And the people who make those consumer electronics, who make the smartwatches, who make the TVs, who make the fitness devices, the bathroom scale monitors, the ultrasound, or not the ultrasound cuffs, the blood pressure cuffs that the consumers buy, they are all at CES. And if we're not there, they don't know we exist. So we're going to go to CES as a wearable ultrasound platform company. And, for most of the consumers that are walking by, they might look at it and go, oh, no, ultrasound from the hospital, that's interesting, and it'll just pique interest. For the other companies that are coming, they're seeing a research opportunity or a development partner opportunity. And we even chose to be in the digital health pavilion rather than being in the supplier area, because we wanted to say this is much further ahead. This isn't the future, this is kind of right now. First time we went there with a mock-up. Last year we went and we had, I think it was more an application of the ultrasound platform, was gesture recognition. So putting ultrasound on the arm and being able to see what the hand is doing has uses in prosthetics, has uses in computer interfacing. But when we were there in January of last year, people thought, yeah, it's cool, but could this be used for blood pressure? It was just blood pressure, blood pressure, blood pressure, blood pressure, blood pressure. And we came back from there at the end of January thinking, I think we've missed a trick. I think we've been trying to pitch this as a development platform, assuming that somebody will take it from us and they will do the blood pressure part. But there's just this gap between, here's an ultrasound platform that you can put on the body, get images off. This guy from Scotland says it can be used for blood pressure, but we don't see how to do this. So we spent 6, maybe 9 months developing algorithms, leveraging all the new stuff that's came out of generative AI and understanding the physics of the body. A human body is just a series of pumps and pipes. And if you get that right, you can actually build a nice physics model that gets you to the accuracies needed to get through FDA on a blood pressure monitor, typically about plus or minus 7 milligrams mercury. Our model is currently at 5 milligrams of mercury accuracy against a cuff. And that means that when we go to CES in January, just in fact a month today, I think we'll be wrapping it up, we are going to be on the digital health pavilion floor with a device on the wrist monitoring blood pressure, showing milligrams of mercury of your systole, so 120/90, from an ultrasound device on the wrist. And
Incredible.
In the space of 12 months, it's so we expect it to be quite quiet. Nobody's going to really take notice of this. We think it's going to be quite quiet. A bit tumbleweed going through that. I really think I'm going to be exhausted by the end of it.
Oh, I think so too, Dave. Absolutely. I mean, honestly, CES, if you're listening in now, make sure if you're not already planning to be there, listening to Dave and everything you described, it's absolutely incredible. And we've spoken a lot about like the business and the technology, but your leadership, Dave, I just again take my hat off to you because I think, what you've done in terms of putting yourself out there from that academic setting, really from the marketing piece to then you going out there and actually with the tires, hitting the ground and you're just making things happen. So again, kudos to you. For people listening in, what's that best way to get in touch if they're interested to learn more?
I would say that, the leadership's kind of the bit of the business that I absolutely do, but I would not be able to lead myself. I lead 40 people who are actually doing the hard part of this. And the reason that I can speak to you guys and travel the world doing this is because of the team that we built at Scotland that are actually achieving this. And these are some of the greatest minds in ultrasound and sensors and AI at the moment working on this challenge. So I absolutely always like to say that I do not do this alone. And if I didn't have that, much like if we didn't pivot business model, I wouldn't be speaking to you about this. If I didn't have my team behind me doing this, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But that said, if people do want to find out more about what my team have built out of the facility just outside Glasgow in Scotland, the website www.novosound.net's the kind of shop front to the world. It's where most of our leads come through. Sign up on LinkedIn, but be prepared to be an onslaught of marketing over the next months or so as we get to CES. And we do also have a CES page on the website where you can sign up to get a one-to-one demo of the blood pressure device on the shop floor at CES.
Well, again, absolutely brilliant, Dave. This has been so much of a pleasure to have you on here to learn more about Novosound and excited for you attending CES. So wishing you well with that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on it. I've just literally got off a plane from Houston, Texas. We've got some clients down in Texas Medical Center. So I landed at 1 p.m. It's now 5 p.m. in Glasgow. And the Christmas party for Novosound, the Novosound Christmas party starts in 1 hour. So I'm about to go and get into my glad rags and go and give it, have a good night, hopefully.
I'm sure it will be. I'm sure it will be.
Amazing. Well, another huge thank you to Dave Hughes, CEO and founder of Novosound. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the MedTech Impact Podcast. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn. Until next time, keep innovating.